Thanks for coming, Paul. Great talk. It's great to actually do the second part of it, which is really focused on the dynamics of preparing for an exit. So, in as much as we have a lot of talks at Casual Connect about theoretical things that are happening in the market. At the end of the day, when you get a call or you get an email saying, would like to explore strategic options with your company, what happens then, right? So that's what really I'm going to be focused on. What do you need to do to be prepared when the time comes that you're going to exit, you're going to sell your company? About me, a little bit about me, 20 plus years in the games industry. I talk about computer science and music mashup. I've done a bunch of things in computer games, started at Kesmai Corporation back in the 90s. Founded Sandlight Games in 2002, sold it in 2011. Advised tech companies from drone companies to startups to public companies. Currently VP of Quorum Group, and I'll talk about Quorum in a second. We do sell-side advisory to private high technology companies. About Quorum, we're an M&A investment bank solely focused on selling companies. Our last transaction in the gaming space was the sale of Digital Extremes, a game developer, to Leo Entertainment, which is a chicken parts company out of China. So, much to Paul's, Paul's research there, definitely a lot of buyers in China. That was about a $120 million transaction, enterprise value transaction. Over the 30 years of doing what we've done, we've created about $7 billion of transaction value. We have the most complete database of both sellers and buyers in the world. And we are the largest tech M&A educator in the world with about 100 talks that we give all around the world because we do believe that the world is flat, associated with selling your company. And so what I've done, frankly, is I've extracted, and Bruce Milne, our CEO, is also in the audience here. Thanks for coming, Bruce. What I've done is I've extracted a part of the presentation that we give that is really focused on preparation, because without preparation, nothing is going to happen. So our presentation called Selling Up, Selling Out is about a 3-hour M&A boot camp. And so I've tried to distill the first part of it in 26 minutes. So what we focus on in Quorum are the 8 stages of optimal outcome. We like to be prepared. We also like to distill the process of M&A into a very discrete set of tasks and a discrete set of stages that you need to go through. The first stage is, of course, preparation. We've talked about, well, that's great. There's not a lot of opportunities for studios currently to exit. There's luck, but guess what? If you're lucky and someone comes to you and says, I want to buy your company, if you're not prepared, that luck is not going to do you any good. So luck is what happens when preparation meets opportunity. Really important. It's very important to be prepared. It will get you prepared for due diligence and also your the record keeping, making sure your books are in order. And we'll talk about financial statements and financial projections as well. Being prepared means preparing your company, and not just preparing your company for sale, preparing how you want to position your company to a potential buyer, but also how you're keeping track of your books, how you keep putting together your financial projections, if your financial projections are defensible, if your product roadmap is defensible. Let me ask a question, actually. How many folks over here do we have that are game developers that are kind of thinking about or maybe have been approached by somebody for an exit? Or thinking about, so I'm not going to put you on the spot. Couple, 2, 3. How many investors in the audience? Investors? Okay. So, yeah, good. So buyers and sellers, which is good. So, this is going to be useful for both groups, I think, at this point. So one thing that I really want to stress is preparing, on this slide particularly, is preparing to live with the deal after closing. What does that mean? If you're a game developer and you've been running your business for 10, 15, 20 years, Dave, good to see you, what happens is that you haven't had a boss for a really long time. And one thing that I had to really, get used to is when my company, Sandlight Games, was acquired, I all of a sudden had a boss. I had to report every day for work. I had to put together status reports and all the things that I hadn't done for years and years and years. You have to be mentally okay with the fact that, listen, I'm ready to take the next step. And that's not just financial. It's also in how you view your role within the organization. Planning is key. So when we talk about higher valuations, we talk about multiples of revenue, we talk about multiples of profitability. Planning, how you plan out your company is really key to how you present and how you're able to show the opportunity for strategic buyers. And you prepare even before you even think about, okay, well, let me go and talk to some buyers. How many of you folks know what an assignment clause is in your agreements? Thank you, Dave. It's good. So there's one, there's two. So take a look at the agreements that you have with distribution channels. I know Apple's actually pretty good at that. They allow you to assign your distribution agreement to a third party if you get sold. However, not everybody is. Okay? So you need to be really careful because that revenue stream that you've received from a distribution channel may not be of use to a acquirer because it cannot be assigned easily to an acquirer. So you need to take a look at the assignment clauses. Work with a competent attorney that knows what M&A is and how M&A works to figure out what are your agreements. Do an internal audit. So a little bit about the buyer's checklist. Let's see how we're doing on time here. Yep. All buyers have a due diligence checklist. It's a lot of times very, very comprehensive. A company like NetEase, right out of China, they operate a wide variety of business units. Or even our chicken parts company that bought out Digital Streams. I can guarantee you their due diligence checklist was not really geared for the particular acquisition that they were doing. So it's not, it's a lot of times it's comprehensive, overly comprehensive. It's not really taking into consideration that this is a video game company that they're buying. And also varies based on the type of transaction that is being presented, whether it's a stock transaction or an asset purchase. I'll talk about the difference between those at the end of this talk. And last thing here is this part. Timing of production of potentially damaging information is often negotiated, right? So the timing of how you disclose the information is just as important as the information that you actually have to disclose. So here's some things that happen on the corporate and legal structure. So what I'm going to be walking you guys through in the next set of slides is a typical set of due diligence questions or disclosure statements that actually are being asked of companies. And they're very general. So things like in corporate and legal structure, you get asked, well, can I see your articles of incorporations, your bylaws, your minutes, changes in corporate structure, your cap table, if you have a parent, if you have an LLC that owns a C Corp or an S Corp or however it's structured, we want to understand that. And so that's one thing that's being asked of you. Financial data, audited financial statements a lot of times are asked of bigger companies. Sometimes the clients that we have don't have audited financials. If you have reviewed financials by CPA firm, that's helpful. Certainly, but financial statements since inception, you'll have to make sure you're going to be able to provide those. Most recent 3-year projections. I'll talk about projections in a second and what they should have. Changes in accounting methods and principles. So if you went from cash to accrual accounting, like I did at Sandlot in the middle of a fiscal year, I had to disclose that. It created all kinds of questions about how my revenue jumped within a couple of months. Well, we changed our accounting principles. If you have reports from outside consultants or accountants, make sure that those are all also included. Tax returns for the last 3 years, any audit details, agreements with credit or debit facilities, bank facilities, contracts, suppliers, vendors, etc. Regulatory insurance litigation, any potential or current litigation, that's something that you're going to disclose first. I'll talk about that in a second. Reports to government agency, etc., etc. Employee relations, of course, it's really critical, especially in the gaming side, because we get valued on IP. Of course, we get valued on revenue, but we also get valued on IP, and we get valued on our personnel. So how you've structured your employee agreements is really very critical in how a company is going to be looking at you. IP, of course. So we talked about employee agreements, IP, making sure that your trademark filings are up to date and they're protected is really very critical. Markets and competition, you know, who are your competitors in this particular market? Say you work on free-to-play games, in casual games, 3-match or what have you. Really critical that you know where you're positioned within the market, who are your competitors, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So don't think that you're going to be able to hide anything from your buyer. You cannot hide your skeletons. You can time disclosure much more efficiently, I guess, or effectively, but you're not going to be able to hide something. I can guarantee you the way that you will kill your own deal is at the end of the day if you can come in and say right before the deal closes, well, you know, we do have this litigation that's pending. You know, I didn't want to tell this to you at the beginning because we're just getting to know each other, but we have this litigation that's pending. Oh, wait a second. I'm sorry, I don't want to buy your company anymore. Because not because you have this litigation that's pending, but because I don't trust you anymore. Because you haven't given me this information while we had a good open conversation back 2 months ago. So that brings me to the timing aspect of it. Control the timing. Best time to talk about the skeletons in the closet is the time that a buyer is most excited about you, right? What's the right time to talk about litigation? At the beginning. They're going to want to know about your financials. They're going to want to know about litigation. When's the time to talk about your product roadmap and the game that you're this great VR game that's innovative and cool and you know, let's talk about product plans. Let's take a look at the source code. Let's do all that information. Let's share all that data. When's a good time to talk about that? I can guarantee you it's not when they sign the NDA and start a conversation with you on week 1, toward the end of the disclosure period. So when we talk about financial statements, we want to see, and you know, when we have our clients, we help them prepare the past financial statements for the last 3 years of operation and future projections for the next 3 years. Really critical, especially in our industry, do not fall into the trap of creating these top-down projections, which honestly are just a bunch of BS, right? Which means, you know, we are in this market niche where we build these types of games, and this market niche is going to increase by 1% every year for the next 10 years. It's not defensible. The defensible projection is a bottom-up projection based on historical data that you've created. Right, there's plenty of models out there that you can use. For example, in the free-to-play world, Eric Seufert created a great, you know, I don't know, probably you guys know about him too, great free-to-play set of models that are associated with ARPDAU and retention to build out an LTV model for a business. You can do that in correlation to your historical data, and it will be defensible. So yeah, so historical statements, 3 years of historical financials, plus current year to date. For valuation, desirable to have financials by month. Let me explain why. Okay, because there's something called trailing 12-month analysis of your company. What happens is, you're having this upswing, right, in users and revenue, and it doesn't happen on a calendar year, but it happens. And you want to capture that growth. The way that you capture that growth is by analysis of a trailing 12-month analysis of your company. So you don't just say, okay, well, last year we did this, and so you know let's build out a financial analysis based on the projections of on historicals of last year. And look at how public companies do their filings, whether it's King or et cetera, or Activision now. You know, look at how they do it. And try to match that. It's much easier for a guy or gal at Corp Dev to take a look at your finances and then take a look at their finances. And if they match, well, it makes their job easier. And if it makes their job easier, then the probability of you actually transacting goes that much higher. So, like I said, projections must be on standalone basis and match historical financial statement format. Be realistic compared to historical results. The more realistic you are, the more defensible your argument is around your financials, the more you're building out a bottom-up model of your financials, the more likely they are to use forward future earnings as a basis valuation. That's what you want them to do. You want them to say, I'm going to be a $20 million company next year, so use the multiple of 20 million, or use a multiple on 20 million instead of the 12 million that I have this year. The more defensible the argument around your financial projections is, the more likely that they're going to be able to do that analysis, and they're not going to poke holes in your model. Understand document assumptions. Don't be too conservative. Don't be overly optimistic. And I can't tell you how many times at Quorum we've seen this. Do not miss your targets while you're negotiating. The whole process of selling your company at Quorum, we've done this analysis across the 300 deals that we've done over the years. It takes about 9 to 12 months to sell your company. If during that process you're missing your targets, again, you're going to have a lot of explaining to do, and potentially a buyer is going to punish you for that, and potentially could walk away from a deal. So don't miss your targets. Paul talked about valuation gaps, right? So what's a valuation gap? I want $10 million. The buyer's only willing to give $8 million, right? So those $2 million, you may be able to receive them in the form of an earnout. That means a series of essentially milestone payments that you receive by reaching certain goals, certain financial goals. We as bankers don't really like earnouts because in the integration process, a lot of times they're very hard to, hard to actually structure in such a way that you receive what what you think you're going to receive. But it's a way of filling those valuation gaps. So those earnouts may be tied to your projections. So be careful. Build those projections on what you really think you're going to be able to do. Paul, you know what a laugh test is? Laugh test? You know what a laugh test is? So a laugh test is something that makes you chuckle because you just don't believe it. In this case, when you have numbers like this that are not necessarily supported by an increase in expenses, it makes you kind of chuckle. Well, I don't believe these numbers. They're not quite right. This right here is a company that I really don't want to buy. It's not growing very much. It's not particularly interesting or exciting. Okay, well, I can believe these numbers over here. There's a lot of, there's probably some defensible arguments around it. Again, on first blush, the numbers should be not overly conservative, because that's not an interesting company. Not overly optimistic, because then the laugh test is not passed. They should be really realistic. That's what you're aiming for. Let's talk about, as a final thing here, the two types of M&A transactions that we look at at Quorum. So what happens is when stock is purchased, and these are the kind of the two considerations that you need to keep in mind. A buyer in a stock transaction, it's one that the seller, you, the game company, are most likely to want. In this case, the buyer buys the stock from the company, then sends cash to the shareholders according to the cap table. Essentially, the buyer assumes all the assets and liabilities of the seller in this particular case. And the tax liability for shareholders, for the most part, is capped at the capital gains rate, whatever the capital gains rate is in your particular jurisdiction, country. And when assets are purchased, different structure. Buyers like this structure. It's sometimes, a lot of times, it's actually tax preferential. Buyers buy cash, or pay cash rather, for certain certain backpack of assets and liabilities, the things that they want. Think of them as going into your company and cherry picking the things that they would like to receive, and essentially leaving the rest in the company, which is really not being bought. It's the assets that are being essentially dragged out of the company. So the company remains. The buyer puts the cash back into the company, and then the company issues a dividend to the shareholders according to the cap table. A lot of times this triggers a double taxation event for the shareholders, right? So the company has to pay tax, and then the shareholders have to pay tax and the dividend. And so you have to be careful, because a lot of the differences in outcome from a net, from amount of money that you can generate in an asset purchase and a stock purchase are very, 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 very different. So my advice is, make sure that you talk to a competent professional, someone that has done that before, that can negotiate on your behalf for the most optimal outcome that you can get. So that's really all I have for you guys today. Again, this is a 25-minute tear through a 3-hour presentation on M&A Bootcamp. Go to quorumgroup.com. We've got a list of cities that we go to. Like I said, about 100 presentations all around the world. We're a worldwide team. Come and visit us, and contact me if you have any questions, or you need these, you want to copy these slides, or you want to talk about anything on this. Thanks again. Any questions while we're here?
In regards to the valuation, you said there were 3 things, or IP, revenue, and people. Yeah. How do they stack up for you need to have every one of them, because they won't be interested if not, but how do they stack up?
Yeah. So the question is regarding how do the 3 things that I talked about, IP, revenue, and people. And last Casual Connect, I did a presentation on drivers of value in games companies, and that actually precisely answers. So you could actually take a look at the presentation I did last year about that. Look, every company is different. Every company is different. A company may have unbelievable IP, right? Very futuristic vision of VR. It has absolutely nothing to do with current revenues, right? And it's all about the future. And certainly people are going to be a component pretty much, especially in the gaming world, every time of what what a transaction is going to be like. At the end of the day, just think about it this way: at the end of the day, your company's worth whatever a buyer is willing to pay for it. And how you get to that level is actually have a conversation with multiple buyers, expand that field of buyers to have that comprehensive auction environment that you can get at that strategic lever, right? Otherwise, your leverage is not all that high, especially when you're dealing one-on-one with a buyer. And yeah, I didn't get too much of that detail, because I did focus on preparation, but at the end of the day, you need to know, you actually have to figure out yourself what makes you the most, what of those kind of 3 things that I mentioned makes you most valuable, and what makes you most valuable. Yeah, well, that's why it helps, having a partner help you do that. But essentially, there is that. You're going to be addressing a pain point for a buyer or for a certain group of buyers. And that pain point may be different from buyer group to buyer group to buyer group. Sometimes, a certain group of buyers, and especially on the financial side, private equity side, may be looking at you purely from your financial performance. Another group of buyers may be looking at you more from, okay, team and IP and fit, saying, we really need a MOBA next year. These guys have it. They figured it out. They're the best team. They've been doing this for years. We absolutely need to have them. So we're going to, we'll make sure that we bid the highest to be able to get this team on our side. They may not care as much about your revenues. But so it has to be very nuanced. That conversation from buyer group to buyer group is going to be different. And you need to be aware of that. You need to be aware of how you position your company for sale, so to make sure that you capture the value groups in that. Just come talk to me. I'll help you out. So yeah, thank you guys. Do I have time for one more or anything else? Or
We are the Chinese mobile game developer, and then this year we probably will go public and delist it. I mean, originally we planned to go public in Nasdaq, but as you know, the P/E ratio in China nowadays is way higher. I mean, it's like one of the top in the world. So we will plan to delist. I mean, to change the organization and then to be a Chinese like a company. And because of that, we have bundled with cash. So we plan to do the MMA job for the probably Japan or like a Korean or like the Western countries for companies. So for you, I mean, because we are more in the financial interest for that, and you mentioned about, so it depends on your interest. So we are kind of new for this industry, and then do you have any suggestion for us to look at any like a profitable, not that big, because if they are big enough, they probably will go like a IPO by themselves, and they probably will go do some like alliance with some big guys. So for us, we are looking for small but juicy and beautiful teams, and mobile related, not only for games but also like advertising or anything related to mobile.
Yeah, no, thank you for that, and certainly contact me about that. You know, this is a really important. I'm starting to make you into a case study, but this is what happens in China. Is there's a tremendous amount of cash that's generated by the public markets. A lot of gaming companies that go and list in the public markets that are looking to expand their portfolio essentially, or expand their reach into Western Europe and into North America. So that's great. And yes, we have companies that we're selling that could probably fit the bill for you, and I'm sure there are companies here as well. You know, thank you for making my point, I guess. And so certainly we'll be happy to chat with you about that. You know, exactly what you're looking for. Okay, guys, you've got my contact information. Thanks so much.